Going. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Hopefully this will be a super helpful session for both government and then tech companies who are on the line. We get a lot of questions at Dcode on, well, this base has reached out to me and they're working on the same problem as another base that is located in Oklahoma, and I want to work with both of the companies, but I have no idea how. And Dcode also gets a whole host of questions from our especially young airmen who want to work with other bases too and sort of not duplicate efforts, but it seems really daunting and really difficult to figure out how to do that if you don't understand the process ahead of time. So hopefully this session will help answer some questions around how, as a tech company, can you navigate multiple end users and multiple Air Force customers in one fell swoop, and then vice versa. This will have a lot of tips for Air Force and government end users on how you can collaborate with not just other bases and other innovation cells and other wings, but also with other services. So how do you collaborate with Navy, SOCOM, and the list goes on. So the way we are sharing this story, obviously the best way you can learn is through experience. And so that's why we have one of our wonderful alumni companies, Stardog, on the line. And John is going to go through his own experience with going through a joint MOU process for phase 2 SBIR with 2 different bases, Travis Air Force Base and Cannon Air Force Base. And eventually we'll find a way to get Captain Josh Davis-Court on the call too. And he will be going through his experience of wrangling all the people together to get that joint MOU set up. And I will go very, very quickly because I know Dcode has had 2 sessions before this. So you probably already, for those who have been on the line for a couple hours now, you probably already have a good sense of what Dcode does. But basically, we connect technology and government to drive commercial innovation to the federal market. And so we obviously work with almost 100 tech companies who have been accelerated to the federal market and gone through our federal accelerator, like John from Stardog. And then we also have a government training program. So we teach government all the nuts and bolts of how do you actually take some really big ideas, scope out some solutions, and connect with the right companies to get the best tech in the door in your organization. And so that's why there's a lot of sort of Dcode as that third neutral party, connecting tech and government and staying involved in the conversation. So that's how we all got here, if that makes sense. So just to give a little bit overview before I turn it over to John, who is going to dive into sort of his experience getting a joint MOU signed and working with both Travis and Cannon. Wanted to do a little bit of level setting around the pros and cons. And by cons, I just mean there's a lot of really hard stuff about getting a joint MOU or even going through this process. And so I wanted to flag some of them before, and obviously Josh can go into a lot greater detail, and John will also be going into a lot greater detail around some of the big challenges of working together, especially when writing a joint MOU. So obviously I think the benefits are endless, but some of the huge ones that makes it all worth it is sort of force multiplying the positive impact. So the same way that you're solving a problem at one base, you could be solving at 6 other bases. And obviously that has huge waves of positive impact for the Air Force. The second benefit, I think, is something that a lot of times government forgets, but connecting multiple units and services is essential to sustaining the project. So what we see all the time at Dcode is that there is a program manager who is working with a company at one base, and then that program manager PCSs to their next job and their next duty station, and that project dies. And by having multiple Air Force end users and working with other bases, it's a lot easier to sustain projects even when the people change. And then for companies, it's a really amazing thing to be able to consolidate all of the conversations and end users under one contract. And it's huge in terms of expanding your funding source as well. There's a lot of hard stuff though, and I don't think some of these are a surprise to anyone, but some of the biggest things that we've seen, especially in the MOU process, is if you're doing matching funds, money is tagged differently across different major commands and services, and so it can be really difficult to write a joint MOU when a wing that is under Air Mobility Command tags their money than someone in a medical unit, and that has been a really big challenge for a lot of folks who are working to consolidate their MOU and their milestone charts, but then there's no actual way for their finance officers to work together to get the funds in the same pot. And then the second one, which Josh can definitely talk to a lot more than me, but it's really, really hard to find a primary point of contact for the joint MOU and the best point of contact for a joint MOU. So even though two bases or two services are working together to write just one MOU and come up with one milestone chart, you still need someone to be designated as the primary POC, and that person is taking on a lot of not only navigating all of the murky waters with the company, but then also sort of is wrangling everyone on the Air Force side to get one set of schedule and set of milestones, and then one person where all the funds are flowing. So it's definitely a really big challenge to find that right person to keep this successful. But I think if anything, John can talk a little bit more about it. It's really great that there are so many innovation cells at each base, because those people are often the best people to go to when you're interested in getting an MOU signed with multiple bases. So I'm going to turn it right over to John to talk about Stardog's experience of going through the joint MOU process and working with two bases for phase 2 SBIR and how exactly he did that. And I know there's some really great things that came out of this, but also John has survived a lot of battle wounds, and I want to make sure that he gets a chance to share that process with you all. So John, kicking it over to you.
Thanks so much, Ray. And is that what we're calling them now, battle wounds?
Yeah, those wrinkles are wounds. Don't worry.
Exactly. No, I appreciate the time, everyone. I know things can be as entertaining as possible. I started explaining or talking about three sort of phases that Stardog went through when we originally decided that a direct phase 2 SBIR was something that we wanted to pursue, and two different bases and actually two different matchcoms to get something done. Please, if questions as we're going through this, please feel free to submit them, and I'd be happy to answer any. But I think it might be beneficial to start just to provide what Stardog is. We are a software technology company based in Arlington, Virginia. On the commercial side, we do a lot with financial institutions, technology companies, and our experience in the public sector primarily on the civilian side and also within the intelligence community. But one of the things that we really wanted to do was try and make an impact and help as much as we can within specific DoD use cases. So Stardog's technology is it's very flexible. Essentially, what our software does is integrates data across multiple different data locations and types, and then uses logical reasoning to infer new relationships that exist within the data, and use that logical layer to apply that to the data. Very similar to types of we're all familiar with, where products will show up in your feed based on your previous searches or your geolocation. It very similar to the way that LinkedIn uses all that data that it knows about you to understand whether or not you might know this person or you might be a good fit for the job. So we're used in a variety of different use cases, and being a small company with limited resources, we wanted to try and figure out how we could make impact on a problem that this type of technology might be able to solve. I will say, sort of the second phase of this is how we went about identifying that use case that we thought would carry the most weight. Department of Defense and Air Force in particular, through AFWERX, Castle Run, and several others, are really making a concerted effort to try and engage the startup community for a number of different reasons. But it's really exciting and refreshing to see the Department of Defense reaching out to companies that of our size and have the technology to try and apply to that. And I think from the commercial side, it's really important to take advantage of that. Rhea had mentioned that Stardog has gone through Decode's accelerator program. That was a great indoctrination into sort of how federal works, DoD as well. And that's provided tremendous insight to us as a company on what we have to do to position ourselves to help make an impact to the DoD community. The other program that we got a tremendous amount of value out of is now called National Security Innovation Network, previously MD5. They had a program called the Technology Innovation Fellowship, essentially where Stardog was the lucky recipient to have, in our case, 2 folks from the Navy and 1 from the Air Force embed in our organization for a number of weeks to take sort of the startup culture and startup experience back to the Department of Defense. And during that time, we learned a tremendous amount. And that's really where we started to identify how our type technology could be applicable to DoD use cases, in particular the one that we entered into a direct to phase 2 on with pilot scheduling. So we had a staff sergeant from Coach Air Force Base embedded in our organization. And as we continued to talk about what our technology does and what his day-to-day responsibilities was, one of the things that came up significantly was the amount of time that the squadrons pay to flight scheduling, to scheduling flights, making sure they're staffed appropriately. And there's a tremendous amount of contingencies that are required to understand what pilot, what co-pilot, what sensor operator, based on training, based on availability, based on all of these different dependencies that exist within this fractured data environment. And so that was one that was extremely interesting to us because that's essentially the same type of problem that we solve on the commercial side for things like banks when they're dealing with regulations, right? When you sell a security, there are all these certain steps and regulations that have to be reported, that have to be traced throughout all of these multitude of systems that the banks have within their organizations. So what we started to do was, after those folks left back to their respective posts, what we started to do is try to figure out internally how we could address that type of problem. We knew from our exposure in Dcode or accelerator program Dcode through the National Security Innovation Network and our fellowship program that we accomplished with them, as well as just verbalizing this with organizations like Defense Entrepreneurs Forum, which is another organization that we try to participate in. That this was a problem that was trying to be solved in multiple different ways, but it was something that affected a great number of squadrons and wings that exist out there. So that's sort of how we narrowed down how it could be applicable, impact to the DoD missions. And from there, what we started to do was take advantage of some of the specific events that AFWERX put on. So AFWERX has collider events and training events where they'll invite companies to talk about some of the technology and the impact their technology could have to DoD missions. And so we started to vocalize how this type of technology, the same type of technology that we interact with frequently through our uses of social media and others, could be applied to this problem while using the existing systems that the Air Force has, and really try and return some of that time and expense and frustration that the squadrons are having when they have to go through these scheduling processes. One of the stories that we heard was, if something changes, if someone becomes unavailable, there's a ripple effect, and it takes a tremendous amount of time to try and get someone else to fill in that spot. Two squadrons that were with that issue. We started to look at the 19.2 open topic, which is taking commercially available technology and customizing it to fit DoD missions. And we were able to start to gain buy-in from both the 22nd Squadron, Heavy Airlift Squadron out in Travis, as well as the 27th Special Operations. Got everyone on a phone call, which was fun trying to navigate schedules, especially across time zones. But we were able to achieve that. And we walked through specifically what each stakeholder wanted to get out of this type of SBIR agreement. And that sort of created the basis for our MOU. One of the things that Rhea mentioned previously was the advantages of having multiple stakeholders in MOUs. And that, was something that we stressed both because everyone's extremely busy at the same time, right? And so as a company, being able to work jointly with two sort of separate organizations still trying to accomplish the same task allows flexibility for the Air Force and for Stardog to pay attention or sort of do work where people are available, while maybe the other wing is not, right? Because they're flying or off doing something. And so it really starts to create a common environment when both organizations and Stardog know that we're trying to solve the same problem based off that joint MOU. In addition to sort of being able to spread the workload across two different organizations based on availability, obviously, for us as a commercial organization, being able to show the viability in two different environments is very valuable to us. So if you're a commercial company that's looking to do business with Air Force or DoD, I strongly suggest that trying to get multiple stakeholders to agree on an MOU is a great thing. It allows you to show that you're scalable across multiple different MAJCOMs, and your exposure is much greater. Now to sort of the battle wounds, as Rhea calls them. The money thing is definitely difficult, just because, and Captain Daviscourt will probably be able to speak a lot more about this because it's not really transparent to us, but we do know that on the backside of it, that there are issues with or difficulties with trying to get money assigned for deliverables. Our having a joint MOU with multiple technical points of contact, on our side, we have to get sign off on both from both parties, which hasn't been an issue. The issue starts to become on the approval side on the back end. And hopefully Captain Davis Court can talk a little bit about what he was able to do to help that.
Captain Davis Court,
you know,
hold on.
Oh, all right.
Yeah, so I'd like to introduce myself real fast. I ran the 27 Special Operations Group's innovation effort back when I was at Canton Air Force Base as a K-9 pilot. Did that for a number of years, and this is my introduction to the great world of acquisitions. And I owe the fact that I'm sitting here in beautiful LA, even though it's raining right now, and I get to continue to be part of this great ecosystem. So thank you very much. This group was actually Dcode was my intro into acquisitions, and it was my first stop. So I believe you guys are in very good hands. So now getting on to the color of money. Yes, that is extremely important because you've got your 3400, your 3600, your OCO, that sort of stuff. What I'd recommend, especially if you are at a base with combat assets, that you tap in with whoever your local warfighter is and use that line of accounting really to unlock additional funding. Or like if OCO goes away for your MAGCOM, I'd recommend that you tap into any program office that has access to anything relevant to contingency operations. So the best example of this was I did a program that was relevant to my weapon system, and I was able to lobby my PO Fixed Wing SOCOM for funding, and he basically ponied up $250,000 for one, and he was able to really meet me and enable me to move forward. And I believe that is so critical, especially if you go into these StratFi SIBR programs. You'll see the ones that usually are going to wind up getting it are the ones that are able to tap into something that is not programmatically bound to a POM cycle. The best way to get that is to go into multiple MAGCOMs and multiple end users, because you can kind of reach in and see all the different avenues that you can, get the nickels and the dimes you need to make a dollar.
Awesome. Did you have anything else to add to your experience before I turn it over even more so to Josh?
Oh, I'm eager to answer any questions, but certainly please turn it over to.
All right, and Josh, this is even more time for you to explain sort of the nuts and bolts of getting a joint MOU signed, but I'd love for you to walk through your process. And for the government folks on the line, Josh could churn out a joint MOU in 1 week, was it? So he was moving at a really fast clip.
So yeah, it's once you do a couple of these, they all blur together and it becomes really, really easy. But the great thing about this is that it becomes a team exercise. It becomes something that you and your fellow POC at another base can churn out relatively quickly. So the best thing that you can do is go on out and network with other like-minded end users, people like you who have a need, have troops, combat or otherwise, in my opinion, a couple of my best projects were actually for non-battlefield use cases. So like anybody that you think that you meet in this ecosystem really can become a resource. So you meet those like-minded individuals. You find, whether or not your idea is better, their idea might be better. A lot of these projects I've had to pivot 5 or 6 times. So really what I've learned is that I can't afford to be too certain about any one thing. And in reality, somebody might have a better answer that I could jump onto. So I certainly did that a number of times. The next step is making sure that your needs are similar enough in terms of the milestones. So you sit down and you dev out a set of milestones in a phone call with your fellow POC, and then you add in a company like Stardog, and then you talk over those joint milestones with them. You might have to tweak it a little bit to get to the answer that is mutually beneficial for everybody. But essentially, that's it. Granted, it sounds easy, but there's a lot of intermediate steps there that I'm kind of glossing over. But once you do like one or two of these, it becomes easier.
Awesome. And I think I'm going to turn it, that leads right into general tips. And so Josh touched on all of these, but some of the biggest things for putting together a successful joint MOU is having that network of folks with mutual interests. So finding allies and people who share the same mentality. And I know it's really wonderful that we had Josh on the line, and Josh's counterpart at Travis was in the same sort of position as he was, and sort of innovation cell leaders. And so it's really great to leverage for companies to leverage if you're working with a specific wing or specific squadron, if they have an innovation cell or spark cell on base, to work through that spark cell, because it's a bunch of really motivated leaders who can help connect you to other bases. The second thing I think, and Josh, chime in whenever you would like. I know you just can't see the screen, so it's why I'm talking through these things, but you will be pivoting a lot, and so get ready to be flexible. I mean, I know from other experiences to this Stardog and to base experience, there's a lot of changing the milestones. There's a lot of changing the strategic matching if you're doing strategic matching for funding, and there's going to be a lot of things that have to consistently get iterated upon. And so just be prepared to pivot. And then Josh, I'd love for you to talk through sort of leveraging other partners on base that is outside of Air Force. So leveraging other innovation networks. And I know you had been working with the Army as well as Air Force to work on some of these projects. Do you have anything to say there?
Yeah, so because I was special operations, I was able to leverage my contacts inside of both Naval Special Warfare and the more boutique units inside of the Army. The great thing about that is that what I've seen inside of Army Special Operations programs is that they would sit down with their SPO, and I've literally seen them hash out a set of requirements and then take it into a program right there. That happened with another one of my SBIR projects. It was really incredible to watch. As far as the Navy goes, they take a different aspect. They decided, I know this sounds funny, and it actually is a lot cooler than it sounds, but they went out and they bought a Boy Scout camp outside of San Diego. And it's called Camp Marina. The Navy SEALs do land nav out there, but I got to go out there. What they do is that they have a huge innovation center out. Granted, it's a bona fide barn and a couple trailers, but they have the ability to reach into funds that are allocated specifically to developing combat capabilities, and you can actually use that to help match funds and help fund your SBIR. And it's really cool to see, because you get to see how the Navy uses it. Navy SEALs, come on, that's cool. And then you get to see this technology flourish in two very separate environments.
Awesome.
So really, like, walking around and figuring out who's who on your own base can unlock all of that stuff, because you can't necessarily meet those kinds of people anywhere else.
That's great. And then the last tip, which is, I think this is how Josh got so many joint MOUs done so quickly. And Josh, definitely talk more about your tips here, but if you work 30 minutes to an hour a day on each project for a joint MOU, you can move really, really fast. And a lot of it looks harder than it actually is.
Yeah, so that's probably my favorite one, is because you need to have a revisit rate on each of these projects, because you don't want any of them to kind of slip to the side. And also in this process, if you have another like-minded individual inside of your innovation cell, you could also use them, to supplement that 30 minutes to 1 hour a day. And that's how you get, a bunch of these, because really it's daunting when you look at how much work you have to do for a project, but it's less so when you realize that I can just break up everything into 30-minute chunks over the next, month or two. Especially with MOU writing, though, that's a lot of the hard work up front. That's when it becomes the 30 minutes to an hour. And it's just going in, doing due diligence on what you're buying, seeing all those different opportunities out there, and then reaching out to your network of people. So what I did was that I know I'm going to move off of the topic a little bit, but what I did was that I actually amassed a notebook with everybody that I met that I think had a similar mentality of going out and doing business. So what I then had a monthly email that I'd send out, detail what I'm doing, follow up with them on what they're doing, and a lot of that turned into projects later down the line.
All right, and I want to turn it over to questions. Do my chat. All right, we have a couple questions. So my company, Air Armor Tech, has an MOU from both the JPO and ACC for our product system. How do we help them decide who puts in what funding amount, percentage of what we need, as opposed to asking them both for the max amount? And do we need to attempt coordination between them? John, I feel like this is your area of expertise.
So I would definitely recommend that getting them talking together is going to be important, not only for money reasons, but I think that when you're actually performing under the SBIR, it's going to be important for you to be able to, for things that one squadron or one organization might not have asked for, and it's important to make sure that they're both aware of what the others are asking for. So I would definitely recommend getting them, encourage them speaking to solve that money issue. That's not something that I think we as a commercial organization can directly influence, but I think getting them speaking to one another can only result in good things.
And Josh, anything to add?
Yeah, so one thing, and I have to admit, I did this to SOCOM. They gave me money, I just kept on turning back and asking for more. So you have to kind of know what your audience is. In my case, yes, I could get away with that. And that's simply because I was an end user. I had a lot of combat hours and I had a lot of missions on my belt. So I kind of had a little bit of street cred with my parent organization. So that's important. So a lot of times, especially if you're going to go big, have somebody inside of that organization make the ask.
Great. Any other questions for Captain Daviscourt, for John? Okay, well, I'm going to pull up everybody's favorite screen, the contact information. So, I mean, if you have any other questions for any of us, Dcode, John from Stardog, or as I like to consider him, your friendly acquisition officer, here are our emails, and I'm sure when these decks get disseminated and all of that fun stuff, you can definitely feel free to reach out. And we're happy to answer any questions on this process, because when it works, it really works. And when there are challenges, it can feel like the last roadblock, but there's always a way to get to yes.
Yeah, I'd like to reinforce just how huge of an amazing opportunity this is for units. So like, if any of you are end users on the line, just know, like, you guys are truly on the verge of something that can change the lives of your people, and not just make sure that their voices are heard, but find a way to democratize the innovation process for them. This is exciting. I feel very excited for you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for the time. I know we're reaching the end of this webinar frenzy, so enjoy the next webinar that you have coming up. But otherwise, it's been an absolute pleasure to get to share some of our knowledge and experiences on this sort of stuff.